Rolling, Mother. Hello.
Hello.
Mummy's Day special.
Are we sitting comfortably?
Yes.
Then we'll begin. Barely 100 years ago, Ma Bosel would have been called a witch, or at the very least, a wise woman. And wise she most certainly was. Some said she had the gift, if gift it was, of seeing the future. She could look into the eyes of a child and determine if they were destined for a long and prosperous life or remain poor and short-lived. Sadly, it was more the latter than the former. This, however, didn't deter the mothers from asking. Indeed, it would have been a surprise to them to be informed that their children would prosper in life, so accustomed were they to their lot. Not only could Ma Bosel predict the future, she was also the first person the villagers called upon when illness struck, or when the birth or death was imminent. She knew which herbs might cure winter chills or summer fevers. She could set broken bones and apply poultices to bruised or sore heads. There was never a day when Ma Bosel's cottage was empty or her door closed, and each hour of her day was busy and full of purpose. "I don't know what we'd do without her," the men allowed over their tankards in the Black Bull. "She's a wonder," agreed the womenfolk at the kitchen table. But when the cottage door had closed on the last visitor and she was alone in the darkness, Mother Bosel would sit beside the dying embers of the fire and reflect on the day. She would sigh to herself and close her eyes, trying not to think about the child who had died before the week was out, or the lad whose injuries even she had no potion to heal. But worst of all, it was the women who came to her with hope in their eyes. How can I tell them the truth? How can I? Some things were best left unsaid after all. Aye, best shut the gob and say nought. In the cottage kitchen, the fire was burning merrily, and coats and shawls steamed as they lay draped over the backs of chairs. "I hope this weather leaves off before we get to Harrogate," Ben muttered, looking out of the window. But the sleet pattering against the panes showed no sign of stopping. "Sit thee down, Benjamin, and stop the mithering," his aunt bid him with a note of irritation in her voice. Ignoring her nephew now, she turned her attention to Clara, seated at the far end of the table. "Them lummox," Ma Bosel nodded to the men, who were contentedly engaged in filling their pipes. "Come sit back, fire lass. They still looks nithered." Clara nodded and went to sit opposite the old woman beside the fire. Ma Bosel smiled warmly at her. "Then, that's better. I can see the colour of the cheeks already." She'd been watching Clara, noting how she'd taken a place at the very end of the table and had said nothing save for "yes, please" and "thank you." "I'll own she has a modest way about her yet." Ma Bosel frowned. There was something about the young woman that troubled her. Clara stared into the fire, unaware that she was being watched. "Not modest, no, not that." Clara looked up, as if she had read her thoughts. It was then that Ma Bosel saw. Not modest, sad. There's sorrow there, I see it now. Something she'd seen many times before. I've seen that look far too often. That lass has lost a bairn. I see it now, and not long since either. She watched, as Clara folded her arms gently in her lap. The lass is holding herself as if the bairn is still at her breast. Eh, the poor lass. The old woman frowned suddenly, for there was something else that she'd seen, and it troubled her. Another sadness yet to come, she wondered. The old woman shook her head. Nay, I'm seeing things. Nay. Oh, so what is the sadness? A little bit more later on in the story. It was raining. Rain that felt like shards of glass stabbing at her face and shoulders, and despite her thick shawl she felt chilled to the bone. What little shelter she'd found beneath the overhanging buildings of Petergate gave scant respite from the bitter December weather. Head bowed, she clutched at her bonnet to prevent vicious gusts of wind tearing it from her head. At her feet, the cobbles had all but disappeared as water, gushing from the drain pipes, turned the narrow thoroughfare into a muddy stream. She winced as icy water trickled down her back and soaked her shawl. Oh, let it stop, dear God, let it stop, she muttered, feeling her earlier resolve washing away with the rain. Oh, come now, lass, she urged herself, summoning what strength she had left. It ain't far now. She wiped the moisture from her eyes, and with a final look up to the sky, left the shelter of the building. Bracing herself against the elements, she made one final dash to Bootham Bar. Once under its arch, she leant against the ancient stones to catch her breath. When's it going to stop? She muttered yet again, looking out at the darkening sky. When her breathing had calmed, she pulled the shawl across her shoulders. It's soaked through, she sighed. She felt as if her clothes had been wet for days now. I swear that lodging house were as wet inside as out, she declared miserably. Feeling under her stays, she found her few remaining coins. Not but tuppence halfpenny left, she sighed, turning the coins over in her hand. Where'd it gone? She despaired. I'm sure that lodging-house keeper took more than she ought. She had little experience of lodging houses or of the vagaries of the city. It ain't like village life, she concluded grimly. Last night she'd barely slept. It wasn't the damp bed nor the strange sounds that echoed around the draughty building that had kept her awake. No, it was a thought she would not survive the next few days, let alone the next weeks, without money. And not only that, her child was due to be born and she would need somewhere very soon. I must find somewhere safe enough until I can, for a future, and that of the child depended on her, and she must have money to find lodgings, but her options were as limited as were her skills. There'd seemed little else but to apply for relief. She'd hoped at first that outside relief might be granted, the few shillings barely enough for a room, let alone a house. But she'd been turned aside, deemed unworthy of assistance. Her last resort was Marygate Poorhouse. She'd been told where to find it from one of the other lodgers. The woman had taken pity on her, and after sharing a penny pie had given her directions. Just a stone's throw from Bootham Bar. Ask for a St. Olave's Church, and you can't go wrong. She looked out at the now darkening sky. It'll be too dark to see its way soon. Just then, she heard the sound of church bells pealing the hour. St. Olave's, she wondered. Then, with only a moment's hesitation, she set off in the direction of the bells. At last, she stood in the doorway of the poorhouse. She took a deep breath and tugged at the bell rope. Somewhere in the bowels of the building, a dismal dong, dong, dong echoed. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened a crack. "Please, I need," she stuttered, shivering in the sleet. "What? What do you say?" mumbled an old woman as she opened the door a little wider. "Speak up, girl." I want," she began again. The door opened wide, allowing her a glimpse into the dark interior. "Oh, stop dithering and come in then," said the woman, peering out of the rain. "They'll catch their death out there if they're not careful." He stepped aside, beckoning to the woman to enter. "Now then, give thee his name afore I take thee to see Mark Jakes," demanded the woman. "Name?" The woman nodded impatiently. "Aye, name. Mark Jakes don't allow folk in without a name." The young woman glanced back towards Booth and Bar. Behind it, the towering minster was barely visible in the gloom. Far away from the mean parish of St. Olaf, the fine houses of the city were closing their shutters against the night. Raising her chin, she took a deep breath. My name is..." The door clanged shut behind her.
No.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a lovely Mother's Day. Good
Have
night.
a lovely Mummy's Day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.